Welcome to another episode of Prepper Talk Radio, radio for the ready-minded, the podcast for the prepared. We are really excited. We've got a great episode for you planned today, and we've got a special guest, and this is going to be one of the ones that you might just want to stop, pull over, listen to the whole thing, pull out some notepads, whatever, but it's going to be a great episode. But before we jump into that, I want to make sure that you remember that to be ready, you've got to have your gear, you've got to have things ahead of time. And one of the things that you need to have is a first aid kit. And this episode is brought to you by our good friends over at AMP3. The guys who created the first kits over there are well versed in preparedness and emergency room, and they just know what they're doing over there. So please make sure you check out our sponsor at AMP3, amp-3.net. If you use code PrepperTalk, you'll get 15% off any of their kits there. So please go and do that. Also, just want to remind you about our good friends over at Jase Medical. If you need medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, anything that you need to get yourself ready to go head up Jase, Jase Medical.com, and they will give you a $10 off if you use code PrepperTalk there. And they will have the dailies, and they have their antibiotic Jase case, which is really a highly sought after case to have in your preps. So as I shared with you, we have a special guest, the famous, infamous, however you want to go with it. We have Jeff Kirkham, author, and now what are you, producer, director? Like, what are you? There's a movie coming out based on the book series that you wrote, right?
There is, my co-author Jason. He's actually the one that's got the flag, and he's running down the field with that thing full bore with his hair on fire. And so really the credit goes to Jason for that. He went to Angel Studios and got those guys interested, and then Jason is he's one of the main writers for the screenplay, because the movie and the book are always a little bit different, because you can write stuff in a book that, if you've got a couple $100 million, you can film it. And if you don't, then you need to back off a little bit. And so he's doing the screenplay for that and for the subsequent episodes that are going to come up. So the credit for that actually goes to Jason. He's all over it, and he's just a bottle of energy to chase that stuff down.
The movie is called Homestead, right?
Homestead. Yep. So it takes place. So it's the same as the book, takes place in the mountain states here, and it follows the book relatively close. We had to change some of the stuff around and whatnot just because of make it a little bit better. And but it follows the story. That's the special forces guy and the business guy that come together, and so some of the same conflict and drama that happens there as well, and the families, all of that, in the background of the stress of the world starting to come apart.
Now, I wonder what your inspiration was for writing the book, right? And is it based on realistic potential events? Is that where you went with this book?
So the story of the book is actually the story of the book is pretty interesting, and that's what led to all of the novellas that are in the book too. So we've got Black Autumn and Travelers and Last Air Force One and Conquistadors, and then book 2 is White Wasteland, which is how I ended up where I'm at when I was talking to you guys about the retreats and stuff. We'll get into that, but book 1 actually. So Jason and I used to, when we were running the Ready Man days and whatnot, I'd go up to his house every day, and we'd have these long conversations. And he's a successful businessman, a big time prepper, and he was like, Jeff, how do you think, and I was relatively fresh out of the war, and he's like, Jeff, how do you think the world could stumble? And I was like, well, I'll tell you how I think it could stumble. I don't think it's going to be one thing. I think it's going to be a series of things that happen that kind of tie together. And ultimately, at that point, I'd never heard of a Black Swan event, but that's exactly what I was describing. So when you read Black Autumn, all of the little things that are happening in there that tie together in a weird way, that ultimately you can't foretell this stuff coming through. So there's no plan put in place other than be as prepared as possible. And
Mhm.
and so in the book and we capture that time and time again, where it's like you could not have prepared for all of these different instances that were happening in the book, nor could the people that are in the book. That's why the characters are flawed, and so the name stayed the same in the book, which is kind of a funny story as to how that even happened. But the characters themselves are flawed, because here they are going into it thinking they, a special forces guy, and it's like, I got this covered, I've got everything figured out. Well, he doesn't. And the guy that's the hardcore prepper, Jason, that's got the homestead, he thinks he's got everything. Well, he doesn't have everything figured out. So it's these
Mhm.
continuing challenges. And what had happened was, when we were putting the book together, Jason and I were having it was a wargaming exercise. So he's like, okay, the last time we were together, it's like these chess games that take months that you see in these movies. You sit down, you move one piece, and we'd come back together, and Jason was like, okay, the last time we were together, you had mentioned X, Y, and Z. Well, what do you think would happen then? And so it was this continuing conversation. And at one point, it was either him or it was probably him, that said, man, this would make a great book. Well, I had started writing a science fiction book when I was in Afghanistan as a way to decompress when I was coming back from missions. And so it's about a special forces guy in Afghanistan. Big surprise, right? But he's treasure hunting. So it's kind of like, if you're familiar with the Flashman series from George MacDonald Fraser, which is a hilarious series of books, completely politically incorrect, but it's kind of like the character is like Flashman meets a special forces guy meets Indiana Jones, so he's kind of an anti-hero. And I used to just, it was a way we'd come back from these missions at about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're all jacked up on adrenaline and caffeine, and you're exhausted, but you're literally too tired to go to sleep. And so I started writing as a way to decompress. And it was this character that was like a treasure hunter pirate kind of guy in special forces. Then he ends up hunting monsters and stuff. And I still haven't released a book, and that's on my list of stuff to do. But
It's awesome.
I gave it to Jason, and he read it, and he was like, oh my gosh, we could do this. And I was like, well, then let's do it, man. And so it took us, we hammered on that thing for 2.5 years or so before the book got released. And then we went to this very long-winded thing, but I think it's kind of cool story. So Jason wanted to go the more traditional publishing route. And I was like, all right, I don't know anything about publishing books. And so we turned it into the publisher. Well, the book was like 1,700 pages long, and the publisher was like, we love the book, but nobody's going to buy prepper fiction that's 1,700 pages long. You are not Stephen King in The Stand, so cut it down. So we chopped a bunch of characters out, but it allowed us to, allowed us to develop some of the other characters that were in there in Black Autumn. And then we released it. So we sent it in, and we said, okay, what do you think? And they were like, we love it. And we're like, okay, we just have to go back and change the characters' names, because when you write a book, you're writing about people, because that's how you keep track of everybody in your brain. And we've got like 15 points of view in the book, which is like, as a beginning author, it's like, don't do that. Keep it to one, trying to keep, it's like we went into this where it's like Tom Clancy, 15 points of view. And it was like, oh my gosh. So you've got all of these people that we know. Well, we sent it back to the publisher, and they're like, no, you can't change anything. It's perfect as the way it is. And so Jason and I kind of looked at each other, and we're like, because my name's in there, right? I'm one of the main characters. And so is Jason. And so we were like, well, okay, maybe 5 people are going to read this thing anyway, so what's the big deal, right? And so we released it. But that's where all the novellas came from, because Travelers was originally, those characters were originally in Black Autumn. Last Air Force One, okay, that was background of what was happening while the president was flying around. Like when you read like the first page in a book, and it's giving you the background. And then Conquistadors was like a background story, so you can see how incredibly complex this thing, we had made this thing. So Conquistadors, that was the the cartel starting to to push north, which is interesting now with everything that's going on. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's where all the novellas came from, and that's, in short, that's the story of the book. It was a blast to write.
Well, my follow-up question was going to be, obviously it's been about 6 years since this has been out. How do you see things are playing out according to your vision, right? Your hindsight now.
It's interesting how some stuff, it was interesting. It was a few years ago that the Saudi oil pipeline got bombed, and I was like, oh, got that one. And then a few years ago that the polygamous family got hit in by the cartel in Mexico, which America invaded with Noah Miller as one of the main characters. We'd written that before that. And interestingly enough, in White Wasteland, book 2, a super flu goes through and wipes out a big chunk of the population. And we wrote that probably a year or so prior to COVID. And so, fortunately, none of those things have tied together and made the world stumble. But Black Autumn, I mean, Black Swan events, by our best guess, happen about every 50 years. And if you go back and you look through history at some of the stuff, it's like they're actually more predominant than you would expect, all the way back to things like the Bronze Age. And it's, nobody really knows what happens of why the Bronze Age failed, but there was definitely a shifting of cultures that passed around. And it's like, even the fall of the Empire of Charlemagne, the empire fell apart because of Viking raiders, that Charlemagne could no longer support these states, that then led to the city-state entities that grew, that essentially became later on modern Europe, and why Europe is so fragmented in the way that it is. But you could look at 2008, the crisis, of the financial crisis there. That was a Black Swan event. And even the American Civil War, you could argue, was a Black Swan event. So the scary part is it's far more prevalent than we give it credit. But we get past them and we just go, oh, okay, that was kind of weird, and then we forget about it. And that's what we were capturing in the in Black Autumn with the cyber attack and with the hurricane was hitting. I mean, the nuke on the front cover, the nuke killed like 50 people, but it incited huge panic that then pushed a massive population to the east that overwhelmed everything, that started this domino effect of everything starting to come unhinged.
Right.
Fascinating. Well, it's fun because it's like we've had you on, I think 4 or 5 other times before this,
at least. Yeah.
And we love your point of view and the contrast, having the military experience. None of us have that. You and Jason, the authors of Black Autumn, you guys are extremely different in your backstories. Yeah. So did that ever cause problems in the writing process? Like, you're like, no, it has to be this way, or it has to be that way. Or did you guys pretty much come together in consensus most of the time?
No, it was very much a consensus. Jason is really good at the character development and creating the internal drama and whatnot. And then obviously all the tactical stuff and whatnot, I was weighing in on that. And it's like, that's ridiculous. Don't do that. Because because people, they don't know. And so they're like, well, I saw this on SEAL Team or whatever. And it's like, don't do that. And so we tried to keep that, that realism, but also like the feelings inside of, like, in Hollywood, somebody, John Wick shoots somebody and it's like he was wiping, something off of his shoe. But in the book, we're like, no, this is stuff that sticks with people. It's like, man, did I make the right decision? Did I not make the right decision? Did I save somebody? And then they're grappling with the fact that they took another human being's life, which, whether that's a bad guy or not, it doesn't matter who you are. It's like people that we talk to, it's like, well, I would do this, that, and the other. It's like, well, there's a great scene in the movie The Unforgiven when the guy goes in and the guy's sitting in the latrine. He's sitting in the latrine, and he opens the door and he shoots him. And then he goes back to tell Clint Eastwood, he's like, yeah, I opened that door. And then he was like, and then I shot that guy. And then he starts, then the realization of what he's done. And he looks at Clint Eastwood's character and he's like, what do we do now? And he looks at him and he goes, now you live with it. And so, and that's the whole part that's so missed in so much of Hollywood. And that's really where book 2, Blood Spring, comes in. Blood Spring starts out, it's pretty dark. I mean, it starts out with a guy committing suicide and he knows that he's going to get eaten. And so by other people, but we wanted to start that way where it's like, the apocalypse sounds really cool. You know, Mad Max. Yeah, that's great. There's hot chicks and you're racing across the desert and all of that. The reality is that is the absolute last thing that we want. You know, I'm reminded constantly of the Patriot where they're like, don't you want to fight? And he's like, no. Are you kidding me? And they're like, well, where's your honor and all that? And he's like, I'm a parent. I don't have space for that. I've got to protect.
I don't have the luxury of that. And
we did.
I love that you brought that into the books and into the movies, because it is one of the things in my discussions with other preppers, no matter where they are, that's sort of like glorified. Oh, we could do that. But there's never a conversation about the impacts later, the psychological effects, the emotional triggers. I mean, I remember from my child, this is a funny example, but I remember from my childhood, I was like 11. And I killed a squirrel with a BB gun accidentally, being stupid. And I remember watching that squirrel die and fall out of the tree. And I was messed up for like a year and a half. I still have memories. I'm like, oh, I was a stupid kid. And it's still like, that's a squirrel. Now put it on the grandeur of a person. That's a huge, huge impact on your mental capacity, on your physical capacity. Because like going through different therapies and different, just all the different things I've done, I've learned like you store memories in your body and traumatic events in your body. And it's like, that's going to affect how you do things.
100%.
Yeah. These werewolf preppers that want to think that they're going to go and do all the, well, I got guns and I'll just go take the food from the people that stored the food. I don't have to store food for the future. And they're going to have a wake-up call, I think, if they even pursue that and act on it. That really kind of brings that mentality to a different, looks at it a little differently, I think. So that's wow.
Yeah. And we really didn't introduce Jeff properly. He's a U.S. Army Ranger, 26 and a half years.
Special Forces.
I
was never a Ranger. I went to Ranger school, but I was never a Ranger. I was
Special Forces. Retired Master Sergeant, correct?
Yes.
All right, awesome. And there's obviously a lot more we could talk about. He was involved with, you developed the Rats Tourniquet. You were involved with Black Rifle Coffee right at the beginning, correct? One of the co-founders, something like that. Yeah. In addition to being an author and so forth, and readyman.com, that's where we really met Jeff right at the beginning. So when Jeff talks about these things, I just wanted to emphasize that when Jeff speaks, I listen. It's he has very much influenced my life and in our discussions over the past several years when he would come on with us. So I encourage you all to go back and search through our episodes and find the ones with Jeff Kirkham on there and listen to those, because they are just packed with knowledge. And I'll shut up there.
To help people find those, it's episode 9, 95,
okay, cool,
48, and 47.
Gosh, have I been on that many times?
Yeah. You have. And we have duplicate 95s on there twice because we broadcasted it different ways. But guys, and we've done, you took us and made us do the Ready Man Challenge one time. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge learning experience for both of us. That was so much fun. But there's also, you're an inventor, you're an absolute professional when it comes to your services to the country. And thank you for that. You're also an author, best-selling author. But the thing I like the most is you're absolutely relatable. We've had some fantastic conversations over the years. It's easy to digest and understand what you're saying because you come from a place of authority, but also you explain it well enough for us to be able to pick it up. The layman who didn't serve in the military, I can follow along because the way you communicate. And now you're also finishing up your master's in nursing. And this is something I really want to dive in. The movie and books are fantastic, but you're also doing a lot for mental health. that you've dived into. Tell me how that happened, because you and Hugh Vale started this, and he was like one of the pivotal guys on the American Prepper Network.
Yep.
And how did this happen?
The universe conspires, right? I fully believe the universe conspires in your favor. If you ever read the book The Alchemist, I highly recommend it to anybody that's out there. Like, just having a positive outlook on stuff, and it's just really, it's a far better way to live life. But with Hugh, so Hugh and I have known each other for years now, and we've become best buds in the last few years. And so back when I was getting ready to graduate nursing school, now about 4 years ago or something, 4 years ago, Hugh, I get a phone call from Hugh. Now, Hugh had been with American Prepper Network and then a couple of other places, had gone through a bit of a rough patch there, and started training wild Mustangs, what he calls gentling wild Mustangs. And wild Mustangs, I mean, imagine a full-grown horse that is a wild animal, and if you are not on your game, they will kill you. It's incredibly dangerous. And so I mean, the pen is like 8 feet tall, because those stinking things will climb out of the pen if it's any less than that, if that gives you an idea. So imagine this thing's coming unglued. So Hugh's one of those guys. I used to call him the barefoot cowboy, because he actually would do a bunch of his training barefoot while he was in there. And people are like, dude, you're going to get your foot smashed. And he's like, well, I'm doing this because it makes me think about where my feet is and my placement and my proximity of the horse. And they're like, okay, that's a little crazy. But Hugh is just an amazing guy. So anyways, Hugh had started this thing called Mustang Medicine. And so I was finishing nursing school, and like literally had just finished nursing school, and Hugh calls me, and he had moved down to southern Utah. And he was like, hey, Jeff, what are you doing? I was like, I just graduated nursing school with my RN. And he was like, cool. He's like, I'm thinking about starting a personal development, wellness, mental health retreat thing. Would you be willing to come down and teach a class? And I was like, well, what do you want me to talk about? And he was like, I want you to talk about how the wise warrior avoids the battle. And I was like, all right, I can do that. And so what I did was, this whole time, because I was in a counterterrorist unit for 13 years, as you guys know, I spent years and years and years and years over in the war doing operations. And so I'd wanted to write a book, or at least a memoir, of how did I regulate my nervous system, because I don't have PTSD. I've got all my fingers and toes. I've got most of my marbles. What did I do different that so many others haven't? And is that something that I can help teach to these guys and gals that have gone through this? And Shane knows this. When I was at Ready Man, you too, Scott, I used to have veterans that would come by the building all the time, and they want to sit down and they want to talk to me about, they're like, Jeff, I heard about you, and you've been spent all these years in combat, and would you be willing to talk to me? And I was like, absolutely. And then all of a sudden, like, I was getting civilians that were like, hey, I heard that you're a cool person to talk to. Can you talk to me about handling stress? Because, some of them were women that had been through horrible, horrible experiences. And I was like, yeah, I was like, look, I'm not a therapist or anything, but I'll listen. I can probably empathize with a lot of this stuff. And so anyways, fast forward a few years, right? And I'm graduating nursing school. And so I wanted to do this self-audit. And so the class that I teach at Mustang Medicine now, we started this retreat, and we've done 17 of them now. And they're transformational. People, I mean, we get everything from very successful CEOs to people who are really struggling with life and things that have happened to them. We've had at least half a dozen that were suicidal, that we, in pieces and parts, helped turn them around. I mean, we didn't do it. We helped. So what I did is, my class is like, look, here's, because I was in the unique position where I was fresh on all the anatomy and physiology and psychology coming out of nursing school. I was like, okay, during my self-audit, what did I do? And I realized that some of the things that I did prior to going out on these missions, on these assaults that we would go after, Taliban and Al-Qaeda guys, I was doing the same thing to prepare for nursing exams. And so it was like, oh, okay, well, why was I doing that? So I started asking myself, getting really curious, why did I do that? Why is that working? What is that doing? What is that? And so I broke it down and kind of established kind of like a little, I had this little ritual that I would do before every mission, and it was before every nursing exam. And it worked. I mean, I graduated with honors from nursing school, and which, I mean, if you're a nurse, it's no small task. I'm very proud of that, actually.
That's hard on any degree, let alone nursing, where you have to know more than any other degree that I've studied. I used to be a college administrator. So pre-law, pre-med, like nursing does more. You have to know more, memorize more, keep track of more than any of those. And it's wow. You graduated with honors. Great job.
It was a challenge, and sitting for the boards. Now, the school that I went to Ameritech, which is now Joyce. That's a phenomenal school. I mean, I can't say enough good about the school. All the professors were nurses or MDs, and everybody was just. So I'm very blessed because it was a great school. They prepared me, so when I sat for the boards, I had no problem. I flew through the boards, but so I developed my class around that, and that is one of the classes where we teach people to help them to regulate their nervous system, and because you have tools and then you have practices, and the tools help you get through the practices, and the practices are kind of like training for those stressful events. So a practice could be something like cold plunging. Lots of people do cold plunging now. We put that in the column of a practice. And then what we do is we teach the physical, psychological, and emotional aspect of why cold plunging is important for you to do. So we don't do cold plunging because it's a fad. We do cold plunging because there's a very important physical, psychological, and emotional aspect to that. And we teach that, and then we practice that. And so you use the tools like breathing or acupressure, or whatever the tools are that we teach you, to get through the practice that's difficult, like cold plunging, especially if you've never cold plunged before. And so that's one of several different things that we do, but that's pieces and parts of what we do down at the Mustang Medicine. It's called the Rewilding is the retreat, but it's Mustang Medicine. So, but it's been hugely meaningful for me. It's intellectually stimulating. I mean, it's fantastic. I do that. I work part-time at a musculoskeletal clinic as well, which we can talk about that too. It's fascinating stuff, but that's tied into what we do at the retreat as well. So, I mean, I'm very blessed. I mean, I fall into these things that it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And where we go.
Kind of a modern day Renaissance man. You got a little bit of everything on the plate.
I'm trying. Renaissance man is just code for severe squirrel chasing.
Mastering the art of ADHD and squirrel chasing. I like it.
Exactly.
So, now jump back to your movie and TV series. I know that's slated for December 2024 for the movie. Is that right?
Yep. Supposed to land. So the movie's coming out first, and they're going to start filming this series. I think they start cranking on the series here in it may be this month or next month. So they're starting with a movie, and then the movie is rolling into a series.
Awesome. Nice. And if you guys want to watch for more information, where can they find information on the Homestead series coming out?
That's the Homestead, and if you go to Angel Studios, it's on their website there, and you can pull that up, and it can direct you. Angel Studios is the easiest way to remember it, and then that can direct you to where it's at. But
now you mentioned that the movie kind of follows pretty well with the book. The first book, the whole of the books, what kind of, where does it fit? Where does the movie fit in your series of books?
First book, so Black Autumn.
Yeah. So the movie is literally just the first book, basically.
Yeah.
And then the series is going to roll into the rest of the books, potentially.
It is. So they're it's TBD. They'll continue because they don't get all the way through Black Autumn. in the movie. I don't want to be a spoiler alert or anything, but then they'll start pieces and parts of the novellas will get interjected in there to help fill out the entire thing. So you're not just watching some characters. They're putting that together so that you're seeing some of the other stuff that's taking place to keep everybody, because what it does is it helps contextualize what else is happening in the in the world and stuff like that. So it's not just the mountains of Utah.
So is this movie going to be something that people can watch and pure entertainment, or are they going to be able to watch and say, you know what, maybe I can do that, or maybe I can learn how to do that a little better? Is there going to be a little bit of what's the slant, if you will?
Well, there's going to be, they're still kind of putting that together for what that looks like, but they've also got like a reality series that they're putting together there, that it's like, hey, here's how you do homesteading, no kidding, homesteading, and what that looks like and how you can do that at home as well. So there'll be some informational, educational stuff on there as well, for sure.
That's awesome.
I don't want to totally change directions. I'm really good at that when I'm asking questions. But obviously, you spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm curious to see your point of view on where things are right now. Obviously, we're waiting for certain events with Israel and Iran, and just wanted to get your take where you think we are, where you think things are going, what you see versus what I might see. If that's appropriate. I don't want to lead this off in a totally different direction, but
no,
stuff you can tell us without having to wipe us out. I can tell you, but I have to kill you. Don't do that. Don't tell us those things.
I don't have any insider information, so I'm just a lay person from the outside looking in. I will tell you, I have, and it's probably the it's like nobody prays for peace more than people who've been in the war. And for me, like I look at, the Ukraine and I look at Israel and stuff like that. And I'm just like, for me, and this is probably not what the listeners want to hear, but I'm like, do everything that you can to sue for peace. Now I got it. There's been wrongs that have been done, but it's never cut and dried. It's never. I've taken on a very non-dualistic philosophy in life, meaning that there's right and wrong, and then there's the middle ground, and I'm very much on the middle ground where it's it's not black, it's not white, it's gray, and I look back at the fall of Kabul and all of the years and years in Afghanistan and the years and years in Iraq, and a big part of me is like, what did we accomplish? And so all of the loss of life, loss of treasure from our countries, because the taxpayers paid for that.
Yep.
And then it happening in the Ukraine now, and then the Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, and so I just look at it, and I got to tell you, I kind of shake my head, where it's like, I don't think Putin's a choir boy, but it's like, why can't we make peace with the Russians? I mean, the wall came down 30 years ago, and it's like, and we still have this boogeyman in Russia. It's like, give me a break. It's like, why can't we make peace with Russians? I mean, we're all coming from the same place. We've got much of the same beliefs, much of the same culture. Yeah, they're coming out of communism and all that. I get that. But I mean, from a guy who was in the military in the 80s, and it was like, kill a commie for a mommy and all of that. But now that I've seen war, and I'm looking at the Ukraine right now, and just the utter devastation that's taking place, it's like, guys, that is, at the end of the day, nobody wins, and all that happens is a bunch of poor kids die and a bunch of rich dudes get richer, and it's like, let's you know what I mean? It's like, war is not the answer. I mean, and that sounds like a pacifist, and like, whatever, people can send me hate mail and I'll be like, whatever, you weren't there. where it's like just keep thinking about the patriot. It's like, do everything you can. It's like, well, we asked. Well, it's like, well, then ask again, but sue for peace, because it's, I mean, how much land is the Russians gained in the Ukraine at this point, and how many Ukrainians have died? I mean, it almost wiped out an entire generation at this point.
Yeah.
It's like, guys, for what? So that Northrop Grumman can get richer? I mean, come on.
I think that the point that you've made is really good, because it's like, in any situation you want to de-escalate, right? The worse the situation gets, the more devastating it is for all involved.
100%.
Right? And it's not just the people that are there. It's like, you got family members. Everybody is involved. You've got cousins. You've got aunts and uncles, neighbors. Like, anyone you're connected to, if it affects you, it affects them. Right? So if it affects our whole country, we're all unscathed. We all are impacted by this. If whatever we can do to sue for peace. I mean, our podcast, since leaving the air and going podcast format, our focus has been able to be more clear with our focus and say, look, guys, we're all about God, family, and community. Like, those are the three things we want to talk about the most. And suing for peace is a godly approach to solving problems, de-escalating, talking it out, finding a resolution wherever possible. Right? There are some times where you just can't get around that. I mean, you can't get around. There has to be violent times, because unfortunately people will choose that because they don't have the same beliefs we do. But if you can avoid it, let's avoid it.
And I'm guessing you probably still believe that it is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. I mean, that's
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, don't get me wrong. It's like, I carry a pistol, and and I'm prepared for violence, but it's very much one of those where much of the problems can be avoided if the people themselves, well, that's what you guys are doing, right? There's Prepper Talk Radio. So if the people themselves are prepared, I've got a good buddy of mine. He's Ukrainian. We were in special forces together. He's Ukrainian. Then he came over when he was a teenager and whatnot. And he's gone now, but he was working in the Ukraine, and they were like, we didn't understand you Americans with your fascination with guns and with prepping and food and all that stuff. And they're like, we understand now. And that's where it's like, if the people are prepared physically, psychologically, and emotionally, then it is unbelievably difficult for them somebody to even consider invading them. I mean, think about what the Japanese general said in World War II, where it's like, you can't invade the United States. There's a rifle behind every bush. I mean, and even the British officers said that during the Revolutionary War. They were like, these stinking Americans with their rifles, they don't miss. And so it's that preparation.
And so that leads me to think of the condition of our country right now. It's being broken down psychologically and emotionally more than anything. And I believe that's, on purpose, but.
Well, because if we talk about this in the retreat, right? So you've got the main neurochemicals, the endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and cortisol. If you keep people in the cortisol state, that keeps them in the limbic section of their brain, which is the emotional portion of the brain. So you've got, with your brain, you in the forefront, you've got the prefrontal cortex, the executive function that takes place. That's our ability to think forward, to strategize, to imagine, and creativity. And then as you move back to the middle of the brain, that's the limbic system, which is the emotional portion of the brain. And then as you go further back to the brainstem, then that's the pure fight or flight, or the sympathetic response, like fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And so if we constantly inundate people, the problem is when we're in the emotional state, we're not thinking with the prefrontal cortex. The two need to work in sync. But if I can stress you out and raise your cortisol levels through physical, psychological, and emotional means, then all you're doing is you're thinking reactively. and then you're much easier to control. We've seen this. This is proven. This is propaganda throughout the ages of how tyrants have been able to run people. A fantastic book is called Rape of the Mind. It was about a psychiatrist that lived through World War II, and that he was interviewing. He was Dutch, and then he came over. He was on the ground in occupied Netherlands with the Nazis, and then made it to England. And he talks about tyrants and the mindset and how they control people. Highly recommend that to anybody that's listening to this, so that they can see how the brain can be manipulated. If you're constantly living in a cortisol state or a stressed out state or an anxious state, you're not thinking creatively, you're thinking reactionary. That's no way to live. You've got to be able to plan forward. And it's a better way to live for you as well as for your family, because we now know cortisol, the stress hormone that activates adrenaline, is contagious. So that whole thing about like fear is contagious, we now know that is absolutely true. Yeah. Cortisol will leach from your body, and the people that are around you, it will affect the people that are around you and start to stress them out as well. So,
and isn't that addictive too? Like the cortisol, like a lot of people will be addicted to having that cortisol dump, and so they kind of live in that cycle.
You got it, 100%. Cortisol, so dopamine is highly addictive, because dopamine is the reward center. We get this on like drugs or pornography or social media or whatever that is, because that's fake dopamine, what we call fake dopamine. But then cortisol is addictive too, because remember, in the beginning stages of stress, when the cortisol starts to flow, it heightens all of the senses. So when you've heard about people that are adrenaline junkies, that's what they're talking about, because initially all of the senses get heightened. But then what happens is you have a cascading effect where that falls off. And then ultimately the problem that you run into is when the cortisol is high, it shuts down the endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, which means we lose our empathy. And then the other problem that we run into is we see things very selfishly because we're in survival mode, because our body thinks we're fighting a saber-toothed tiger. And then what happens is it's incredibly inflammatory, and our body stops fighting disease that can grow in the body. That's the modern society, right? Driving down the road, stressed out from job, from work, from family, from build, that ultimately leads to these diseases. That is the problem with cortisol that is happening with modern society. Part of it, but with modern society, and we've got to get out of the dopamine, or we've got to get out of the cortisol and back into the prefrontal cortex, or at least a balance between the two, because we don't want to be robots either. A balance between the two, so that then we can live life to the fullest effect, which may mean get off of social media. Stop watching the 6 o'clock news. When you're prepping, prep in a fun way with your kids and with your family, so that you're learning new and cool skills. That's a dopamine dump, not a cortisol dump. That's the difference.
Awesome.
Well, fantastic, Jeff. We sure love you, brother.
Yeah.
Love talking with you.
If somebody wants to learn more about this whole hormonal balance thing, where can we send them? Where can we put a link, or what can we tell people to go learn more about how to balance their?
They can come to Mustang Medicine, and we've got a site up, mustangmedicine.com, and we've got stuff on there, and we're adding new stuff all the time as we're continuing to develop that and build that out. And then always welcome to jump on the retreat, come down to the retreat too. That's in Southern Utah. It's beautiful.
Awesome. Sweet. So we've got your books on Amazon. We'll put a link for that. We've got the Homestead, the movie coming out about your books, and Mustang Medicine. We'll put those all in the show notes for people who want to learn more. Thanks again for being on our show with us, Jeff. We hope that it was valuable for you, and we hope that everybody who was listening got something out of this today and learned something new that they can do. And then not just learn something new, but learn something that you can apply to your life to make it better. So once again, remember to go to our website, preppertalkradio.com, and download our resources, get on our email list, check out our Facebook group at Emergency Prep and Self-Reliance, and get involved in our community and get involved in the conversations that we're having there around preparedness and being prepared, self-reliant. And we'll have some more great information for you guys as time goes on. Thanks so much again, Jeff, for being on the show. And until the next time, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Jeff. You've been awesome. Appreciate it.